Chains are a part of life, and we try to avoid suffering at all costs. But to deny that we're going to suffer or know conflict or hardship at some point in our life, it's not being honest. It's actually cruel. Suffering is a part of life. Pain, conflict, we'll all know it at some point. Paul was probably in a small cell, maybe like the ones here at Eastern State. This penitentiary pioneered the use of solitary confinement in the 1800s. When prisoners checked in, they were given a King James Bible and nothing else. No human contact allowed, and many of them actually went mad. We don't know if Paul was beaten or if he was in solitary, but he was in a cell, suffering, all alone. That's when he wrote Philippians. Maybe you're not in a literal prison, but we all know what it's like to be chained to some form of suffering. I mean, I was talking with a guy in our church who has chronic back pain, and it follows him along every hour of his life, and he feels like he'll never escape it. Maybe you're chained to a chronic illness or a hospital bed, and your life is a series of tests and scans and doctor appointments, and you never break free. Or maybe you're chained to a relationship that you're struggling with. Maybe you feel like your marriage is struggling, or you're single and you struggle with loneliness. Some of us have relational chains. Some of us are feeling the chains at work. Maybe you're chained to a desk at your work. You got a job that feels like a dead end. It's a crummy job, and you feel like actually unfulfilled, and you're never going to find something better. Or maybe you're chained to an addiction. You know exactly what it's like to feel like you'll never break free. You'll never escape because you've got addiction you can't lift, and you're going to be stuck in that prison forever. Or maybe you're in a prison financially. Maybe you lost your job and you're struggling with unemployment or foreclosure or bankruptcy, and you've got a mountain of debt, and you feel like you are chained to that debt for life. Whatever your chains are, whether they're relational or financial, emotional, vocational, whatever your chains are, one thing is to be sure, we hate them. Why? Because they weigh us down and they restrict our freedom. And you know what? They remind us how little control we truly have over life. When pain touches our lives, it has a way of locking us up in a prison all its own. I'll never forget the day when learning my dad had cancer. Growing up, nothing happened in our family for like 30 years. There were no illnesses, no tragedies, no sudden deaths. I mean, we loved each other, we loved God, and kind of had a hopeful outlook on life. But then about 10 years ago, my dad was diagnosed with cancer. And I'll never forget that day. It's something that you can't prepare for that. It's like it hits you right in the gut. But not still with God. I don't know what was worse, the cancer or the treatment, because all of a sudden life, as we once knew it, was hijacked, and it became a series of appointments with the oncologist, and scans, and tests, and chemo trips, and it was pretty brutal. When we suffer, our natural impulse is to say, what has happened to me is wrong. You know, my dad did nothing wrong. He loved God, he was a faithful husband and father, and it violates our sense of justice. What's happened to me is wrong. What's happened to me hurts. I don't know what's more painful. Watching someone you love suffer, or actually being the one in pain. The good news is my dad's condition stabilized. He actually has a lymphoma. It's the kind you can't cure. It's a chronic condition, but you learn to live with it. And God was with us during that process. He got us through. We started learning how to take one day at a time, not in huge chunks as we were used to doing. But then last year, my dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer on top of everything else. And this fall was one of the darkest seasons in my family's life. My dad actually went into depression. And depression is a prison all its own. It's like a deep, dark hole with no light. You can't see anything. I mean, faith seems far away. It was hard. I remember visiting my dad in the hospital, and he was like a shell of himself. This was a guy who loved to talk baseball and laugh together, and course of that, he was just flat. And I'll admit, we spent many nights praying, and my prayer was just this: why? Why, God, my Father? this is when suffering seems pointless and we rage at God. Why? Why are you allowing this to happen to me? Sometimes our suffering can make us angry, and then on the other side of that is this like resignation that says, okay, maybe this is as good as it's going to get. Change. I think suffering has a way of sobering us up. I mean, when Paul wrote this letter to the Philippians, he didn't know what would happen next. I mean, he might be released, and he might be executed. I mean, death was a very real possibility when he wrote this letter. And sitting in that cell, he must have struggled with loneliness, and anxiety, and fear, and maybe he felt like he was forgotten. Or might have become bitter. I mean, it would have been easy to do either of that, but look what he wrote here. Now, I want you to know, brothers, what's happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. As a result, it's become clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I am in chains for Christ. Sometimes our circumstances seem random. I think that's when it's hardest, when our suffering seems pointless or it has no larger context. And yet Paul chose to interpret his circumstances very differently. I mean, look at this. In itself, Paul was actually being watched by the Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard were the elite Roman troops who lived in the palace of the Roman emperor. And Paul was actually chained to one of the guards. And for him, that was a sign from God that his suffering had a larger purpose. He figured, if I'm chained to this guy, talk about a captive audience. I mean, God just really want this soldier to know about Jesus through my suffering. And so Paul began to actually share the gospel with the prison guard. Imagine a prisoner telling the guards about freedom. I mean, there's more than a little irony here. And yet in the midst of this, Paul actually says, what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. There's a bigger context for what I'm going through. And when I hear that gospel, we all know gospel means good news. Maybe you didn't know that, but what good news is there in suffering? This is where it gets interesting, because I'll tell you something. The way Christianity views suffering is what distinguishes it from every other world religion. I mean, some Eastern religions say that pain is an illusion. It's not real. It's something we should transcend. But Christianity says just the opposite. Pain isn't something to minimize or downplay, because at the center of our faith is actually a cross. A cross is an execution device that was used in Rome for prisoners, for capital punishment. Christianity says that actually our faith rests on historical fact that one day God actually broke through into human history, was unjustly accused, was put in chains, was led up the hill, and was executed between two common criminals, capital punishment for an innocent man. That's what Christianity is founded on. So in some way, at the heart of the Christian faith is a God who knows what it's like to suffer, to be in chains, to endure the harshness that life has to throw at us. Prophet Isaiah actually describes Jesus this way. Check this out. Isaiah says, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and familiar with what? Familiar with suffering. Like one from whom men hide their faces, he was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he took up our infirmities and carried our sorrows. Yet we considered him stricken by God, smitten by him, and afflicted. You know what that means? That means that Jesus can relate to whatever it is you're going through. I don't know what you're going through, but more than that, Jesus' suffering was not pointless, but actually had a larger purpose in God's story. On that cross, we're told, his suffering not only paid for our sins, but it purchased our salvation, not just now, but for eternity. Jesus chose the chains out of love, and he did it voluntarily, so that our suffering would be temporary, and eternally we could escape pain and suffering forever. You aren't in chains by chance. God knew that this would happen.